is episode number 212 of the A Bar Above podcast, and this week we're doing things a little bit different, in case you haven't noticed. I'm Juliet. I am the other co-founder of A Bar Above, and this week I stole the camera from Chris because we're going to be celebrating the female perspective. I am interviewing Morgan McLachlan, the master distiller behind AMASS Gin. So listen in to hear a little bit about how she got started, how she navigated the wild world of distilling as a female, and a little bit of advice for how you can do so as well if you're interested in distilling. So today we have a super special guest joining us. Morgan McLachlan, the master distiller from AMASS Gin, is joining us to talk a little bit about AMASS Gin, about how she came to be in this position, and a little bit about what it's like to be a woman in the world of distilling. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I love your podcast, by the way. It's like very thoughtful.
Well, thank you. All credit goes to Chris for that one. I am stealing the camera for this episode just because we're talking from the woman's perspective, but I'll make sure he hears that for sure.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, you are the master distiller at AMASS Gin, which, sneak peek, is one of our favorite gins of the moment. And I'm not just saying that myself. One of the folks on our team, our staff mixologist, admitted that he felt the same way. So definitely a bar above favorite gin for the moment, for sure. So we would love to hear just a little bit about your story. How did you learn distilling? How did you get into this sort of place with AMASS Gin? How did you develop the product or improve upon it? I would just love to hear your story.
Sure. So how did I get into distilling? Do you want me to start there?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great.
So I didn't wake up when I was a little girl, like 5-year-old girl, and say, I want to be a distiller when I grow up. I actually come from a family of artists and grew up in an art studio and was certain that I was going to be an artist like my grandfather. My first career, I ended up getting into the motion picture industry and I worked as a camerawoman for the first decade of my working life.
I love that.
And then moved into distilling. And people often think that that's a very random transition. But the fact of the matter is the professions there's a lot of crossover in that. I would say both cinematography and camera work and photography for that matter and distilling have a lot of similarities in that they're both an art and a craft. And there's, a certain je ne sais quoi involved in making a good product in both of those mediums. But there's also a lot of technical knowledge. There's a little alchemy. There's aesthetic or traditions in both trades. And that's actually another good point is I would consider both positions, both being a camera woman and being a distiller is really something that I think of as a trade, albeit maybe a little bit more of an artistic trade. So I became interested in distilling actually through some academic work that I was doing in Eastern Europe and going from the west coast of Canada to Eastern Europe and discovering that there's actually a really, there was this rich, micro or local distilling culture there and got really into drinking all of the regional spirits and liquors there and, meeting people in towns and tasting what, the slivovitz that their grandmother made kind of got me interested. And then years later, I moved to Southern California and started thinking, what would a regional spirit in Southern California be made out of? And the other part of my sort of, I guess, my specialty specific to the world of spirits is I also have a huge interest in botany. So sort of this interest in actually the cultural, thinking about spirits as a cultural product, as a regional product, and also knowing and loving how botanicals have always been used in alcohol beverage products since the dawn of time. Hippocrates had a recipe for a botanical wine that was medicinal, for example. So those interests led me to distilling. And I think it was maybe just from my experience as a camera woman. As we know, there are more and more female distillers, but it traditionally is a male dominated industry, same as camera. When I left the union 12 years ago, or I mean, it was maybe 13 or 14 years ago now, there were only 5% women working in the camera department. And there are in the time that I've been distilling, which is about 14 years maybe now, there were really very few women distillers at the beginning. There are more and more, which is wonderful. But there weren't, you asked me earlier if there were, any female role models I had in this industry. And at that time, they were really hard to find, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So from there, I actually just I built a still and started distilling in my Hollywood bathtub. I used to live around the corner from the Celebrity Center, the Scientologist building. And it was in this funny little fourplex. And was distilling there really as a hobby for years, really focusing on just playing around with local agriculture. Obviously in California, we grow a lot of fruit, not so much grain. So distilling any fruit I could get my hands on, and then also all of the local botanicals. And then from there, founded one of the first craft distilleries here in Los Angeles called the Spirit Guild, and where we have our own line of products. But quickly discovered I'm less of a marketing person, and really, my passion was for distilling. So started partnering with a lot of other brands to develop their products for them. And AMASS was one of those brands. So AMASS started as a client. AMASS Gin is actually the fourth commercial gin that I have on the market, like under different brands, and just really loved working with my now partner Mark Lynn. So we worked together developing AMASS, and it was sketching out the concept for it, and then putting it through R&D. And it was a cumbersome one because it has a lot of botanicals. It's pretty loud, and we talked about how we like bigger gins, and AMASS definitely is a bigger gin. And so collaborated that way, and then eventually I joined AMASS 2.5 years ago to lead product development full time, and came on as a co-founder, and it's been a really great experience.
I love that. That's such a great recap of your story. It makes it sound like you were always destined to be here, but I guess sometimes it seems like that, doesn't it?
Well, if you want, what do they say? If you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans. So, right? You never know where you're going to end up.
I love it. Looking back on that, now, you're here, great. But were there ever any moments which were particularly difficult, or where you were like, forget this distilling thing, I'm going back to the camera work?
Yeah, well, it's sort of funny because camera work is also very grueling. And I think, if there's any distillers or brewers or winemakers listening to this podcast, they know, there's a lot of, I think to outsiders, it's like a very romantic profession. And it is, I will say, you absolutely have to have a huge passion and dedication for it, because mostly it's a lot of very hard work, and frankly, a lot of janitorial work. It's physically very demanding. And that's not even talking about, being a small business owner or an entrepreneur, and the whole business side of starting your own business, which I didn't have a background in. Most of my family, as I mentioned, are artists. So in terms of, business experience, it was all new to me. But the cool thing I discovered when I, raised money and founded and operated my own distillery was that business is also, it's extremely creative, and I find it really fulfilling. And it's really, really, really fun and exciting, but not for the faint of heart. And you never stop. You never stop.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and be honest here. When I think of a master distiller, I kind of think of you from the perspective of like stock photos. where you're, tasting from the still and going, that's good, more cucumber, or like, that's how I think of the job of a master distiller.
Sure.
Can you maybe like dispel that a little bit? Like, what does a day in the life look like for you? You mentioned janitorial work, you mentioned like physical labor, and I'm sitting here imagining like you like, sitting on a still tasting, very different, right?
Well, there is a lot of that, and then there's a lot of like, oh my God, where do we put these like 500 pounds of spent juniper berries, and like pulling them out of the still, and then like putting them in the freezer to give to the brewery down the street because they're gonna make a juniper. And so there's a lot of like, or like, oh no, the chiller broke and we have a fermentation going and it's Los Angeles and it's 95 degrees and the chiller broke, and I have to come in at like 2 a.m. and there's a pipe leaking, and so you kind of it's just a lot of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of sweeping and mopping. There's a lot of, if you're smart about distilling, there's a lot of note taking, with, quote, the term of the year is supply chain issues. Oh no, but my bottle supplier like didn't tell me that they're not making this bottle anymore that I've been using for 5 years, and I have to quickly find a new bottle that I like and redesign the like, it's a lot of that stuff. But there is the glory too of, developing product, sourcing beautiful fruit to make one incredible eau de vie out of, or, testing, juniper from 5 different suppliers on a lab still, or, trying things out. Like in AMASS, we use a couple of different mushrooms actually to add some umami flavors, trying out different distilling mushrooms. Oh, most of them, like literally, to use wine language, have barnyard notes. Maybe we shouldn't put that in a gin. So there's that, there's that side of it too. Like, but it is really pretty hard.
I appreciate that. And I think it is kind of easy to see any job as being super glamorous, but there's always sort of the other side too. Chris and I sometimes joke that, we're the CEOs, but we're also the janitor, like, and everything in between sometimes, right?
Yeah. And a lot of like, my friends that work in the trade, like bartenders too, like, high proof alcohol, like, I've like, alcohol is a desiccant and it sucks the moisture out of your hands. So like, having these like hands of like a oil rig worker, and then high proof alcohol also takes your nail polish off. So like, there's stuff like that too that isn't that cute, but it's worth it.
But it's real, right? And I appreciate that. I really do. One of the things that I think I'm kind of curious about is, the nature of botanicals and fruits and vegetables is that, no 2 strawberries taste exactly the same. No 2 cucumbers taste the same. No, mushrooms, same as, like you said. And I assume this is a big part of your role, is trying to maintain a consistent final product given an inconsistent, ingredients that you work with. I mean,
that's right.
That's your magic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a lot of, what we do. And it's funny because it is subjective too, right? So, and, so there's strategies for dealing with like product consistency. But yes, that does involve nosing and tasting every single batch, every single distillation run, keeping track of your botanicals. Are they fresh, or is it a different supplier? Like, how do these compare? And it's funny because, it really involves, that's the interesting thing about what we do, because, making booze, it's not like we're saving lives, but it is a very sensual, sensory experience. And like, my joke is that I have the hardest working nose in downtown Los Angeles, because it's just a lot of like smelling and tasting things. COVID was very scary for me. Like, I was like, how am I going to do my job if I get COVID?
Oh, seriously? That is scary. I think absolutely. I definitely know people who've been in that position where it's like, well, I can't do my job for 2 weeks and hopefully it'll come back.
Yeah, totally. I actually know a couple distillers who lost their sense of smell temporarily, but it recovered. So,
phew, thank goodness. Yeah. So, hopping over to kind of the female perspective, you touched upon this earlier about how there, especially 14 years ago, there were very few women in distilling. And frankly, if I can put my own words in there, very few women in the spirits industry as a whole. Can you maybe speak to that? Do you think that that made your ascent to your current role more difficult, easier, more interesting? Like, how did that impact you?
Well, I think it's funny because, I think in statistically, if we look at numbers, there's certainly income disparities between women in all industries. There's certainly glass ceiling situations. Women who have had children, like myself, you actually have a decline in income even if they're working full time. They're sort of less valued all of a sudden because they have kids. So, and as I mentioned, I came from a profession that was also very male dominated, and I worked in the entertainment industry in in peak Weinstein era. So, to be candid, I was, I went through things that I would never want younger women to go through. I was sexually harassed daily, and at that, and that's not even talking about job performance. And at that time, it was just like the attitude or the wisdom was that you just had to be tough and put up with it, kind of. But yeah, certainly an industry and a male dominated profession that or there was chauvinism. So I think, but I persevered and actually had a really successful career in camera in spite of that. And that's not to say I worked with absolutely incredible men and had a great team. So definitely had like supportive male coworkers, but when I got into the distilling industry and saw how at the time it was male dominated, I was kind of like, okay, well, I've like been here and done that, and like I know how to deal with this. The other thing too is working as distillers, some of them hang out, but just by virtue of the fact that we're kind of all over the world, we get together and talk shop now and then, but distillers tend to be sort of more lone wolf kind of characters that work on their own a little bit more. So I didn't really, I didn't encounter anything like the chauvinism that I encountered in my previous career. I will say, very early on, I went to a number of trade organization events and definitely found that there was like at that time a boys club that existed. And then the few women that were in the industry were so busy like hustling and killing it and doing their thing, they didn't really have time to like network and talk to baby distillers like myself. So there are a few, I mean, at that time, probably like Karen Hoskin of Montano was around and killing it, and she's always been really amazing. But yeah, I remember going to like an ADI conference like 10 years ago, and there were like 8 women out of 1,000 attendees, and like 6 of them were in marketing. So it just was one of those things where like it didn't deter me at all. But long story short, I knew I wasn't going to join that boys club, and I didn't want to join that boys club. I don't want to like I love talking shop, but like I don't need to be part of, I don't need to fit in with anybody. So have sort of like eked out, mentors and other distillers and other people in the industry in general that I really love having, great conversations with and sharing tips and stuff. But I kind of was happy to kind of do my own thing. And most distillers in a way are self-taught anyways. Like it's one of those things like painting, like you can't really get good at it unless you just do it.
And do it a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. That's really interesting, and I thank you for mentioning a few names. That was actually my next question, so you're ahead of me there. But you brought up something really interesting and something that actually has impacted my career as a woman in the industry too, and that is having kids.
Yeah.
We have two boys, and when I was pregnant, it was a very strange time being in the spirits industry. I
Yeah.
remember there was times when we were doing a seminar with a cognac brand, and they wanted us to taste. And I was very early in my pregnancy, and it wasn't public information. And I was in a very awkward position. I was not comfortable tasting, but it ended up being a very uncomfortable
Oh yeah.
conversation. I
Yeah.
mean, how did that impact you? I mean, how did it impact your job to deal with that? I mean, I know a lot of women in our industry, you know, have kids and
Yeah.
navigate this. Do you have any insights from your own experience?
Well, it was funny because I expected there to be like a lot more like stigma about, oh, like a pregnant distiller, but that wasn't so bad. I mean, it was a little bit challenging in that you're while I was pregnant, you're correct. Like, you know, you can't drink, but you still can nose. I was doing, you know, I'm already a lightweight, and which is, you know, another funny thing being a distiller. So I had a very sort of rigorous practice of spitting, of
Oh,
using
sure.
a spittoon, and so I was able, when it was absolutely necessary, I was able to taste and use a spittoon. You know, was I going out and hanging out with my bartender friends at their bars? No, because I was falling asleep at 7 o'clock at night because I was so tired.
Right.
So it actually wasn't that bad, and I found that people were supportive. Um,
That's so great to hear.
yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought. It's just, it is, I think the hardest thing for me, honestly, was just sort of finding, like, I'm still just, it's like my son's almost 2 and I'm still trying to navigate, you know, having a child and finding balance between work and being present for him.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's the never-ending struggle for sure.
Yeah.
Our boys are 5 and 3, so we're right in that
Oh, yeah.
young
Oh my
toddler
gosh.
age too.
I'm I'm very impressed. Yeah, it's like I don't like I'm really impressed by anyone who has more than one child. Like, I don't know.
They pretty much just run feral at this point.
I'm
Although
sure
it
they're
is
having
a
a
little
great
bit
time.
funny being in the spirits industry, we will receive little swag things, sunglasses, maybe a backpack from time to time. We have to be a little bit careful because, you know, I may not pay attention. And once we had my 5-year-old show up at preschool with, I think it was Patron sunglasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't really go over well.
Oh yeah.
So we've had to be a little bit more careful about the spirit's influence on our children. And, you know, every once in a while, one of our kids will ask for a cocktail, which we do make like kids cocktails. It'll be, you know, lemon juice and simple syrup and sparkling water, but among a crowd that doesn't know that, it might not sound so good. So when they start school, it should be interesting.
Well, hopefully you'll kind of get to, you know what, I think this is great because you'll basically get to like screen for all of the petty, narrow-minded parents.
That's
like,
true.
Oh my God, you know, and then you'll be like, oh, that person's an asshole, so, and I don't need to talk to them.
You'll immediately know who you don't want to hang out with.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I love that. So I was looking at AMASS's website just to kind of go back to AMASS, and you guys don't just make gin, you make all sorts of things. And in fact, I have a little bit of a funny story about this. Chris and I went to a co-working space, gosh, maybe 6 months ago. And we walked in the door. It was a new space to us, and they have hand sanitizer. And so we took some hand sanitizer and walked back to the room and sat down. I said, Chris, you smell amazing. What is that? And it was hand sanitizer, which turns out was by AMASS. So that just so happened right after we had started talking to your brand. So it was destiny for sure. But I'm here to tell you, you make very wonderful smelling hand sanitizer.
Oh, I'm glad you like it.
Are you involved with all of these products, or are you just involved with the gin?
No, I do the product development for all of our products. So in the case of, we do have a range of beverage products, the gin, vodka. We have a non-alcoholic spirit called Riverine. We have our hard seltzers.
There we go.
So I developed all of those. And then I have also developed all of our personal care products.
How fun.
So yeah, it's been very fun. And it's been really interesting getting into the world, of chemistry, formulating personal care products, but also fragrance. There's, obviously botanicals, gin, botanicals, fragrance. There's a lot of crossover. And in fact, the lab practices are very similar. So it's been really incredible doing that.
I can only imagine there's probably a lot to learn working with such a different product, a soap versus a gin, very, very different chemistry, I imagine.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's more complex chemistry actually, but then if you have a lab practice, it's not, it wasn't as challenging as I thought.
Okay.
I definitely want to learn more, but I kind of need to, not spread myself too thin. So, yeah. But yeah, it's been really, and especially the fragrance side of things has been really interesting. We came out with a range of candles, like home fragrance. And that's really, for me personally, where I want to spend a lot of my attention in the next few years is working on fragrance development.
I love that. And I was just about to say, do you have either a favorite line of products or a favorite product, or are you allowed to say that when you're, it's like picking your favorite kid, right? You're not really supposed to say that. I don't know.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, that's, that's true. I mean, I don't know, like you might move through like cocktails or I kind of circulate through them. So, I couldn't drink for some time because I was pregnant, and then I was breastfeeding, and actually during the time just after I was pregnant, I was developing hard seltzers. So I went from never having tasted a hard seltzer to getting my hands on every single one on the market and tasting them all and then developing art. So I was like drinking a lot of hard seltzer for a while. But I'm back. My alcohol tolerance is back, and I'm back into just drinking a good old fashioned martini. So I've been drinking a lot of our gin again. Another product that we launched last year was After Dream, which is a cannabis spirit that's only available in California. But that's also something I've been indulging in lately.
I love it. I love that. Are there any new products coming out that we should have our eyes out for? Anything that's not too secret, I suppose?
We launch so many products. Like if you go to our website, my partner, Mark, called it a Cambrian explosion of product launches. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I looked at a picture of all the products, and I was like, oh yeah, there's actually a lot of products. So I'm decided to go into a bit of stealth mode this year. So really, there isn't anything decidedly on the launch calendar for the near future, but I'm really having a fun time just kind of tinkering. Getting things out really quickly was, an exciting challenge, but I'm kind of enjoying just sort of going back to the basics and playing around and seeing what we can come up with. And my hope is that, we can do some more more limited edition kind of stuff, items in a little while, but we'll see how that goes. There will be more things. I just don't know when they'll come out.
I love it. Just going to wrap this up with two more questions. First of all, just to kind of wrap up the conversation around being a female in this space, do you have any advice for other women who are either just in the beverage industry in general or who are specifically looking to become a distiller? Any advice to help them kind of navigate the space?
I think that, well, I could, you can do it. Anybody, if I can do it, everybody else can't, trust me. But, it's sort of funny. I don't know if I have any female advice specific to women other than, stick to your guns and It's the same advice I would give anybody, really, which is, this is a trade, and you're not gonna master it overnight, and to just, it is hard because, distilling, to do a whole distillation runs, it takes all day long. So if you're teaching yourself, that's all of your weekends or your time off or whatever. So just be patient, honestly, be patient, take meticulous notes. That's one of the big mistakes I made early on when I was learning distilling, was, I'd make something and it would turn out incredible, and it'd be like, oh my God, how long was that fermentation? Or like, where did I make the cuts? And then, and then you couldn't emulate it. So note taking is big. Don't be afraid to go and reach out to, a lot of distillers are kind of like surly, introverted kind of people, but don't be afraid to reach out to distillers, train your palate, talk to your local bartender, find out what they like. A big thing is learning the history too, learning the reasons why. There's a lot of sort of arbitrary, socioeconomic, historical context for why things taste the way they do, or the reason why there isn't so much brandy in the United States, or except there used to be, or does bourbon really need to be made with the New American No. 3 char barrel? Understanding that history, I think, and at least the formal traditions of distilling and their categories, I think is really important base for A, being a good distiller, a good technical distiller, and B, if you're going to get creative, understanding the conventions of the category that you're working in, and then knowing if you're going to break a rule, knowing why you're breaking it. I think it's also, important to kind of look at it. For me, it's really important to look at it like an artistic process and practice, and to step away from it, to go to a museum or go out in nature. You find inspiration all over the place. So that's also important.
I love that. And I can definitely appreciate, sometimes you just can't learn something till you've done it a lot. And so I love your comment about patience. Especially at this day and age, it's easy to kind of say, well, I want to take a 3-hour course on the internet and know how to do something, darn it. But some things just aren't that way.
I wish it was that easy.
Right? But then again, if it was that easy, everybody would do it, right? So that's an opportunity to be better in a way.
It's true. And I think there is a lot of, like the journey, like, is the destination. Like it is when you're doing something like this, especially something that involves the senses, like, you have to be really mindful about it. It's kind of turned into like my job. There's a lot of mindfulness to it, and intentionality behind it. And that's, that involves a lot of patience and just kind of doing things methodically and slowly.
Yeah. I imagine you can't rush this. You can't rush a distillation. You can't rush an infusion necessarily. Like, you just got to let it take the time it needs.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, you could microwave a steak, or, I don't really know if that's the best, but yeah.
It's true though. It's totally true, right? Like, you want it done fast, sure, but it's just not going to be the same. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of wrap this up, I just want to give you an opportunity to share, like, where can we find you on the internet? Where can we find AMASS? And is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, sure. Well, AMASS is amass.com. We are on Instagram. I don't think we're on Twitter. We're AMASS on Instagram. My Instagram is Gin Witch.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm kind of terrible at posting, but then when I do, I hope that it's intriguing. I'm trying to get better at that. And yeah, we're in terms of like finding our products, we're distributed in Oregon, California, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Colorado, Illinois, Michigan, New York, New Jersey. There's maybe a couple other ones. So we're here in the States, and then we're also abroad. We're in the UK, Spain, Greece, Singapore, Hungary, strangely. So if you're, traveling the world, because you've got to get out there, look for, you happen to be in Budapest, look for our gin.
That's too funny. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I loved hearing your story. I love hearing the kind of real side of distilling. Maybe it's not quite as glamorous as the stock photos might seem. Maybe there's a bit of that too. But I just love that. And I am going to go take a look at the Cambrian explosion of AMASS on your website after this.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely include those links in the notes as well, so people can find you on the internet and find AMASS, and if they're in Budapest, to hopefully find you as well.
Oh, thanks so much. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Morgan, for coming on the podcast and chatting with us. I personally learned a lot about what it's like to be a distiller, and maybe it's not quite as glamorous as I thought. So definitely check out the links in the show notes. We'll have all the links to AMASS, to find Morgan on the internet, and of course to find A Bar Above and our products as well. If you are into this sort of thing, if you love craft cocktails, if you love gin, and if you need barware, do check us out at abarabove.com. We have some of the best barware out there. I'm a little bit biased, but I think it's pretty awesome. Thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.